washed-up camera, I never should have pressed play on that video. Some things are better left lost at sea. The sun beat down on my exposed neck as I trudged along the shoreline, garbage bag in hand. It was my third beach cleanup this month, but the ocean seemed determined to vomit up an endless stream of plastic bottles, food wrappers, and unidentifiable junk. I wiped the sweat from my brow, squinting against the glare off the water. That's when I saw it. A bright yellow object half buried in the wet sand. Probably another kid's toy, I thought. But as I got closer, I realized it was a waterproof camera. My heart quickened. I'd found some interesting things during these cleanups, but never anything quite like this. I plucked it from the sand, turning it over in my hands. It was banged up, covered in scratches and dings, but otherwise intact. The waterproof seal looked unbroken. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the power button. To my surprise, it flickered to life. The battery was nearly dead, but there was enough juice left to access the memory card. I scrolled through the photos and a story began to unfold. A young couple, maybe in their late 20s, on what looked like the vacation of a lifetime. Selfies in airports. Pictures of tropical drinks on white sand beaches. Stunning sunsets over crystal clear water. They were a good-looking pair. The guy was tall and athletic with a mop of curly brown hair. The woman was petite with long blonde hair and a smile that lit up every photo. They looked so happy, so in love. The last few photos showed them on a small boat, cocktails in hand as they cruised over turquoise water. The final image was a selfie of them kissing as the sun dipped below the horizon behind them. I smiled, caught up in their joy. But then I noticed there was a video file after the last photo. My thumb hovered over the play button. Something made me hesitate. A little voice in the back of my head warning me not to look. I should have listened. The video started shakily, the camera's owner fumbling to hit record. When the image stabilized, I saw the same couple from the photos. But the scene couldn't have been more different from their carefree vacation snaps. They were on the small boat, but it was night now. Rain lashed against them as the boat pitched violently in massive waves. The woman was crying, mascara running down her cheeks as she clung to the side of the boat. The man was yelling something, but his words were lost in the howling wind. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and I caught a glimpse of sheer terror in their eyes. This wasn't an adventure anymore. This was life and death. The boat lurched, nearly vertical as it crested a huge wave. The woman screamed as she lost her grip, sliding across the deck. The man lunged for her, dropping the camera in the process. It clattered to the deck, coming to rest at an angle that showed only the churning black water and a sliver of the boat's hull. I could hear their panicked shouts, barely audible over the storm. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold, a deep, grinding crunch of metal on rock. The boat shuddered violently. There was a moment of eerie silence before the woman's terrified shriek pierced the night. "We're sinking. Oh, God, we're sinking." The man's voice, tight with panic. "The life jackets. Where are the dash?" His words cut off abruptly, replaced by the roar of rushing water. The camera's view tilted crazily as the boat listed to one side. I caught a final glimpse of a hand desperately grasping at the air before the camera was swallowed by the waves. The screen went black, but the audio continued for another 30 seconds. Choking, splashing, screams that became gurgled cries for help. Then, nothing but the sound of the storm. I stood there on the beach, frozen in shock, the camera clutched in my trembling hands. My mind raced, trying to process what I just witnessed. This wasn't some movie or prank video. I just watched two people's final moments of life. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow, and I doubled over, retching into the sand. When the nausea passed, I straightened up on shaky legs and looked out at the seemingly peaceful ocean before me. Somewhere out there, maybe not far from where I stood, that couple had lost their lives. I needed to do something, to tell someone, but what and who? I had no idea where this camera had come from or how long ago the accident had happened. It could have been drifting in the currents for weeks or even months. I fumbled for my phone, barely able to concentrate enough to dial 911. When the operator answered, I struggled to explain what I'd found without sounding like a lunatic. I found a camera on the beach. I stammered. There's a video on it. A couple on a boat. There was a storm, and I think they died. I think I watched them die. The operator asked me to calm down and explain again more slowly. I took a deep breath and tried to give her a clearer account of what I'd seen. She asked for my location and told me to stay put. Someone from the Coast Guard would be there soon to take my statement and examine the camera. I paced back and forth along the water's edge as I waited, my mind replaying the horrific video over and over. I couldn't shake the image of that hand reaching out as the boat went down. Did anyone even know they were missing? Were there people out there right now wondering what had happened to their loved ones? After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, I spotted a Coast Guard truck pulling into the beach parking lot. Two officers in uniform approached me, their faces serious. I handed over the camera and recounted my story once again. They asked me questions about exactly where I'd found it and if I'd seen any other debris on the beach. As one officer bagged the camera as evidence, the other took down my contact information. You did the right thing by calling this in, he told me. We'll do our best to identify the couple and notify their families. This could help bring closure to a missing persons case. I nodded numbly, the weight of the situation settling over me like a heavy blanket. The officer must have noticed my distress. His stern expression softened slightly. Hey, I know this must have been a shock, he said. If you need to talk to someone, we can put you in touch with a counselor who specializes in trauma support. I managed a weak smile and thanked him, but I knew no amount of counseling could erase what I'd seen. As I watched the Coast Guard truck drive away, I was hit by a wave of emotions I couldn't quite name. Relief that I'd done what I could to help. Sadness for the lives lost and the families who would soon receive devastating news. And a gnawing sense of guilt, as if by watching that video, I'd somehow intruded on that couple's private tragedy. I turned back to the ocean, my eyes scanning the horizon. The water looked so calm and inviting now, nothing like the violent maelstrom I'd witnessed on that tiny screen. How many secrets did it hold? How many other stories were out there, waiting to be discovered? A shiver ran through me despite the warm sun. I'd come to the beach that day for a simple cleanup, but I'd stumbled into something far larger and more profound. It was a stark reminder of how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. I gathered up my forgotten garbage bag and headed home, my steps heavy with the weight of what I'd experienced. As I reached the parking lot, I paused and looked back at the ocean one last time. I'm sorry, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was apologizing to the couple, to the sea, or to myself. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the couple from the camera. I scoured local news websites for any mention of the incident, but found nothing. I jumped every time my phone rang, half expecting it to be the Coast Guard with an update. But as the weeks passed, the sharp edges of the memory began to dull. I still volunteered for beach cleanups, but I found myself approaching each piece of litter with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Every discarded object seemed to hold the potential for another hidden story. I never did hear anything more about the couple or the camera. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if it was some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a happy couple on the beach or hear about a boat going missing at sea, and it all comes rushing back. I've learned to live with the knowledge that the ocean holds countless untold stories. Some are tales of joy and adventure, while others are tragedies hidden beneath the waves. That day on the beach taught me to appreciate the preciousness of life and the raw power of nature. Now, when I walk along the shoreline, I see more than just sand and water. I see a vast, mysterious world full of secrets, some meant to be discovered, and others perhaps better left lost at sea. I never thought I'd die trying to save someone's life, but as the dark shapes circled beneath us, I realized this might be my last act as a lifeguard. The day had started like any other at Crescent Bay. The sun beat down on the golden sand, and the crash of waves provided a soothing backdrop to the chatter of beachgoers. I sat perched on my tower, scanning the water with practiced eyes, my skin sticky with sunscreen and salt air. It was nearing the end of my shift when I spotted him, a lone swimmer, much farther out than the safety buoys. Even from this distance, I could tell something was wrong. His strokes were erratic, his head barely breaking the surface between gasps for air. I was on my feet in an instant, grabbing my rescue buoy and sprinting towards the water. The cool waves shocked my system as I plunged in, my powerful strokes eating up the distance between us. "Hold on!" I shouted. "I'm coming!" As I got closer, I could hear his panicked gasps and splashing. He was a middle-aged man, his face a mask of terror as he fought to keep his head above water. That's when I saw them, dark shapes, just beneath the surface, circling lazily around us. My heart leaped into my throat. Sharks! I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. I'd deal with that danger when I had to. Right now, this man needed me. "I've got you," I said as I reached him, holding out the buoy. "Grab on." Instead of taking the buoy, he latched onto me, his fingers digging into my shoulders as he tried to climb on top of me. We both went under, the taste of salt flooding my mouth. I struggled to the surface, pushing him away. "The buoy!" I sputtered. "Grab the buoy." He wasn't listening. Blind panic had taken over, and he clawed at me, trying to use my body as a flotation device. I'd been trained for this, but the reality was far more terrifying than any drill. We went under again, and this time I caught a clear glimpse of our silent observers. At least 3 sharks, their sleek bodies gliding effortlessly through the water around us. They were keeping their distance for now, but I knew that could change in an instant. I broke the surface, gasping for air. The man was still clinging to me, his weight threatening to drag us both down. I had to get control of the situation fast. "Listen to me," I shouted, my voice harsh with urgency. "You need to calm down. I can't help you if you don't let me." Something in my tone must have gotten through to him. His grip loosened slightly, and I managed to push the buoy between us. "Hold on to this," I instructed. "I'll tow you in." He nodded, his eyes wide with fear, but he grasped the buoy. I positioned myself behind him, ready to start swimming back to shore. That's when I felt it, a bump against my leg. My blood ran cold. One of the sharks had gotten bold. I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke to the man. "We need to move. Now. Whatever you do, don't thrash around." I began to swim, pulling him with me. Every stroke felt like an eternity, my senses hyper-aware of the danger lurking just below the surface. We made it about halfway back when I felt another bump, harder this time. I stifled a yelp, not wanting to panic the man I was rescuing, but he must have sensed something was wrong. "What is it?" he gasped. "Nothing," I lied. "Just focus on staying calm. We're almost there." Another bump, this time against the buoy. The man let out a strangled cry. "Oh God! Oh God! There's something in the water." "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my own panic at bay. "They're just curious. If we don't bother them, they won't bother us." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a false comfort. These sharks were getting bolder by the second. It was only a matter of time before curiosity turned to aggression. I picked up the pace, my muscles screaming in protest. The shore seemed impossibly far away. I could see figures on the beach now, pointing in our direction. Had they spotted the sharks? Were they calling for help? Suddenly, the man let out a blood-curdling scream. "It bit me. Oh, God!" It bit me. I looked down and saw a cloud of red blooming in the water around his leg. The sharks went into a frenzy, their lazy circles turning into sharp, darting movements. There was no more time for caution. "Hold on tight," I yelled, then started swimming with everything I had. The next few minutes were a blur of churning water, the metallic scent of blood, and the blind terror of knowing that death was literally nipping at our heels. I felt something graze my back, rough like sandpaper, then a searing pain in my calf. I didn't dare look, just kept pushing forward, pulling the now nearly unconscious man with me. The water around us was chaos. Fins broke the surface. Sleek bodies brushed against us. Each second, I expected to feel the crushing pressure of jaws clamping down. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, my feet touched sand. We were in the shallows. I stood up, dragging the man with me. "Help!" I screamed. "We need help here." Figures were running towards us now. My fellow lifeguards, beachgoers, someone with a first aid kit. As hands reached out to take the injured man from me, my adrenaline finally gave out. I collapsed onto the wet sand, the world spinning around me. I don't remember much after that. Flashes of faces, voices asking if I was okay, the wail of an ambulance siren. I woke up in a hospital bed, my leg throbbing and wrapped in bandages. A nurse smiled down at me. "Welcome back," she said. "You're quite the hero." It all came flooding back. The rescue, the sharks, the desperate swim for shore. "The man," I croaked, "is he?" "He's alive, thanks to you," she assured me. "Lost some blood, needed a lot of stitches, but he'll recover." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a wave of emotion I couldn't quite name. I'd done my job. I'd saved a life, but I'd also come closer to death than I ever had before. As I lay there, processing everything that had happened, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. I'd always known intellectually that being a lifeguard meant putting my life on the line, but experiencing it, feeling the razor's edge between life and death, was something else entirely. The following days were a whirlwind of medical checks, debriefings, and visits from friends and family. The local news ran a story about the hero lifeguard, and I found myself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. But in quiet moments, when the hospital room was empty of visitors, I found my mind returning to those terrifying minutes in the water. The feeling of helplessness as the sharks circled us. The burning in my muscles as I pushed myself beyond what I thought possible. The absolute certainty in those final moments that we weren't going to make it. A week after the incident, the man I'd rescued came to visit me. His name was Paul, and he hobbled into my room on crutches, his leg heavily bandaged like mine. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life." I shook my head. "I was just doing my job." "No," he insisted. "What you did was extraordinary. I thought we were done for out there, but you never gave up." We talked for a while, piecing together the events of that day from our shared perspectives. Paul told me about the cramp that had seized his leg, leaving him struggling in the deep water. I filled him in on the parts he'd been too panicked to fully register. The circling sharks, the frantic swim to shore. As he was leaving, Paul turned back to me. Will you go back? To lifeguarding, I mean." It was a question I'd been asking myself ever since I woke up in the hospital. The experience had shaken me to my core, forcing me to confront the very real dangers of my chosen profession. But as I looked at Paul, saw the gratitude and life in his eyes, I knew the answer. "Yes," I said. "I'll go back. It's what I'm meant to do." He nodded, understanding. "Thank you," he said simply, then left. In the weeks that followed, as I underwent physical therapy and prepared to return to work, I often thought about that day. The terror, yes, but also the incredible focus and determination that had seen us through. I knew that the ocean, for all its beauty, could be unforgiving. I'd felt its power firsthand, seen the deadly efficiency of its apex predators. But I'd also experienced the incredible resilience of the human spirit, the strength we can find when pushed to our absolute limits. As I stood on the beach my first day back, the familiar scent of salt air filling my lungs, I felt a mix of emotions: respect for the power of the sea, humility in the face of nature's might, but also a renewed sense of purpose. I climbed up to my lifeguard tower and scanned the water, ready for whatever the day might bring. The sharks might still be out there, unseen beneath the waves, but so was I, watchful, prepared, ready to dive in and fight for a life, no matter the cost. Because that's what it means to be a lifeguard, and I wouldn't have it any other way. One moment, she was building sandcastles by my feet. The next, she was gone, and as the tide crept higher, I realized my daughter's life hung in the balance of the next few crucial minutes. It was supposed to be the perfect family day at the beach. My wife, Sarah, and I had been planning this trip for weeks, eager to give our kids a break from their tablets and video games. Our son, Tyler, was 10 and already showing signs of teenage angst. But our little Emma, just 5, still had that wide-eyed wonder about the world. We arrived early, claiming a prime spot near the lifeguard tower. Tyler immediately ran off to join a group of kids playing volleyball, while Emma started constructing an elaborate sand kingdom at our feet. "Look, Daddy," she squealed, pointing to a shell-encrusted turret. "It's the princess's tower." I grinned, amazed at her imagination. "It's beautiful, sweetie. Why don't you find some more shells to decorate it?" She nodded enthusiastically and scampered off, her little yellow bucket swinging at her side. Sarah looked up from her book, smiling at our daughter's excitement. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" she said. "I'm going to grab us some ice cream from the stand." I nodded, my attention already drifting back to the novel I'd been engrossed in. The sounds of the beach, crashing waves, laughing children, crying seagulls, created a soothing backdrop. I glanced up occasionally, seeing Emma's blonde pigtails bobbing as she searched for treasures in the sand. It wasn't until Sarah returned, hands full with dripping ice cream cones, that I realized something was wrong. "Where's Emma?" she asked, looking around. I sat up, suddenly alert. She was just here a minute ago, collecting shells. But as I scanned the beach, there was no sign of our little girl. No yellow bucket, no pigtails, no sound of her giggles. Panic rose in my throat. "Emma," I called out, jumping to my feet. "Emma, where are you?" Sarah's face paled. She set down the ice cream and joined me in shouting Emma's name. Other beachgoers turned to look, some joining in the search. "I'll check the water," I said, my heart pounding. The thought of her tiny body being swept out to sea made me sick. "I'll ask around," Sarah replied, her voice tight with fear. Maybe someone's seen her. I ran to the water's edge, scanning the waves for any sign of yellow or blonde hair. Nothing. I waded in up to my waist, ignoring the cold shock of the water. "Emma," I bellowed, my voice breaking. After several agonizing minutes, I returned to shore. Sarah was talking to a lifeguard, her hands shaking as she described Emma. I joined them, desperation clawing at my insides. "Sir," the lifeguard said, his tone professionally calm, "when was the last time you saw your daughter?" I struggled to think clearly. Maybe 20 minutes ago. She was collecting shells. He nodded, speaking into his radio to alert other staff. "We'll do a sweep of the beach. In the meantime, retrace her steps. Look for anything unusual." Sarah and I split up, calling Emma's name as we searched. I found myself back where she'd been playing, staring at the now crumbling sandcastle. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Tiny footprints leading away from the castle, heading towards the far end of the beach. I followed them, my heart in my throat. The prints led to a section of beach I'd barely noticed before, where the sand gave way to rocky cliffs. And there, half hidden by an outcropping, was the entrance to a small cave. "Sarah," I yelled, "over here." She ran to join me, followed by the lifeguard and several other beachgoers who joined the search. "The caves," Sarah gasped, but I thought they were sealed off. The lifeguard frowned. They were supposed to be too dangerous, risk of collapse. I peered into the darkness of the cave entrance. It was small, but big enough for a curious 5-year-old to squeeze through. "Emma?" I called into the cave. "Emma, are you in there?" For a heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then, faintly I heard it, a small, frightened voice. "Daddy? I'm scared." Relief and fear warred within me. She was alive, but trapped in a potentially unstable cave. And as I looked down, I noticed something that turned my relief to terror. Water. The tide was coming in, already lapping at the cave entrance. "Emma, honey," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you come back out the way you came in?" A sob echoed from the cave. "I can't. It's too dark, and I'm stuck." The lifeguard was already on his radio, calling for backup and rescue services. But as I watched the water rising, I knew we didn't have time to wait. "I'm going in," I said, already taking off my shirt. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Young, no. It's too dangerous." I looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, but also the understanding. This was our baby. There was no choice to make. "I'll be careful," I promised. "Just be ready to help us out." The lifeguard handed me a small flashlight from his kit. "Be quick," he warned. "That tide's coming in fast." I nodded, took a deep breath, and squeezed into the cave entrance. The flashlight beam seemed pitifully small in the oppressive darkness. Water sloshed around my ankles, shockingly cold. "Emma," I called. "Keep talking, sweetie. Help Daddy find you." "I'm here." Her voice was clearer now. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I wanted to explore, but then it got dark, and I couldn't find the way out." I followed her voice, moving carefully over the slippery rocks. The cave narrowed, forcing me to crouch. The water was up to my knees now. Finally, my flashlight beam found her. She was wedged in a small alcove, her face streaked with tears and dirt. When she saw me, she let out a cry of relief. "Daddy, I'm here, baby," I said, reaching for her. "Let's get you out of here." But as I tried to pull her free, I realized the problem. Her foot was stuck, wedged between two rocks. The more she'd struggled, the more tightly it had become trapped. "Okay, Emma," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I need you to hold very still. I'm going to try to move these rocks." The water was rising faster now, already up to Emma's waist as she sat trapped. I could hear shouts from outside the cave, the rescue team arriving, but I knew they'd never make it in time. I braced myself against the cave wall, pushing with all my might against the rock trapping Emma's foot. It didn't budge. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to stay calm for Emma. "Daddy," she whimpered. "I'm cold." "I know, sweetheart," I said, my mind racing. "Just hang on. I'm going to get you out." I wedged the flashlight into a crack in the rocks, giving me both hands free. Then I took a deep breath and plunged my arms into the frigid water, feeling around Emma's trapped foot. The rock was smooth, worn by centuries of water and wind. That gave me an idea. "Emma, honey," I said, "when I tell you to, I want you to pull your foot as hard as you can." "Okay." She nodded, her eyes wide with trust. I positioned myself, getting the best grip I could on the slippery rock. "Okay, pull now." As Emma tugged, I pushed against the rock with every ounce of strength I had. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that echoed through the cave, the rock shifted. Again, I shouted. We pushed and pulled together, the water now up to Emma's chest. With a final heave, her foot came free. I scooped her into my arms, hugging her tightly. "Let's go home," I whispered. The journey back seemed to take an eternity. The tide had risen significantly, making the path treacherous. I held Emma high on my chest, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck. Finally, we emerged into the fading daylight. A cheer went up from the crowd gathered at the cave entrance. Hands reached out, helping us up onto dry sand. Sarah was there in an instant, wrapping us both in a tearful embrace. Paramedics swarmed around, checking Emma for injuries. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of what had just happened hit me. I sank to my knees in the sand, still clutching Emma tightly. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she sniffled. "I didn't mean to scare you." I kissed the top of her head, my eyes filling with tears. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. That's all that matters." In the days that followed, as Emma's scraped foot healed and the story of her rescue made local headlines, I found myself reflecting on those terrifying moments in the cave. The absolute fear, yes, but also the incredible strength that comes from protecting someone you love. We returned to that beach a few weeks later. The cave entrance had been properly sealed, a new warning sign erected. Emma was hesitant at first, clinging to my hand as we approached the water. But then she saw a seashell glinting in the surf. Her face lit up with that familiar curiosity. She looked up at me, silently asking permission. I nodded, smiling. "Go ahead, sweetie. Just stay where I can see you." As I watched her scamper off, bucket in hand, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for Emma's safety, for the preciousness of these moments, and for the reminder that sometimes the most important adventures are the ones that bring us closer together. They say lightning never strikes the same place twice. But as I watched that stubborn swimmer tempt fate, I realized some people are determined to prove that saying wrong, even if it kills them. The heat wave had been brutal, baking the sand and turning the boardwalk into a shimmering mirage. For days, our little coastal town had been a refuge for inland dwellers seeking relief from the oppressive temperatures. As a lifeguard, I'd never seen the beach so consistently packed. But today was different. The suffocating heat had finally broken, replaced by an ominous stillness. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, their underbellies flickering with distant lightning. The Weather Service had issued severe thunderstorm warnings, and most beachgoers were packing up, heeding our calls to clear the area. Most, but not all. I spotted him from my perch on the lifeguard tower, a lone figure still bobbing in the waves about 50 yards out. Even from this distance, I could see his strong, practiced strokes. A local, I guess. Someone who thought they knew these waters better than any storm. "Hey!" I called through my megaphone. "Sir, you need to come in now. Storm's approaching fast." He ignored me, continuing his leisurely swim parallel to the shore. I gritted my teeth in frustration. In my 5 years as a lifeguard, I'd learned that some people simply wouldn't listen to reason. My partner, Jake, jogged up to the tower. "Coast is almost clear," he reported. "Just a few stragglers packing up." "You spot something?" I pointed to the swimmer. "Yeah, we've got a stubborn one out there. Mind backing me up while I try to talk him in?" Jake nodded, his expression grim. We both knew how dangerous the situation could become. I climbed down from the tower and made my way to the water's edge. The wind was picking up now, whipping sand against my legs and churning the waves into frothy peaks. "Sir," I shouted again, cupping my hands around my mouth. "You need to come in immediately. It's not safe." This time, the swimmer paused, treading water as he looked in my direction. For a moment, I thought he might actually listen. Then he raised his hand in what was unmistakably a dismissive wave before resuming his swim. I swore under my breath. The storm was nearly upon us now, the sky an angry mass of roiling clouds. A flash of lightning lit up the horizon, followed almost immediately by a bone-shaking crack of thunder. "That's it," I muttered. "I'm going in after him." I was about to grab my rescue board when Jake caught my arm. "Wait," he said, pointing. "Look." The swimmer had finally turned toward shore, his strokes more urgent now. Maybe the close lightning had finally knocked some sense into him. But as I watched his progress, my relief turned to concern. The current was strong, pushing him parallel to the beach instead of toward it. He was a good swimmer, but he was fighting against a force of nature, and nature was winning. Another flash of lightning, this one much closer. The thunder was deafening, and I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. We were out of time. I'm going, I told Jake, grabbing my rescue board. Call it in, we might need backup. I sprinted into the surf, diving onto my board and paddling hard against the waves. The water was choppy, making it difficult to maintain a straight course. Rain began to fall, fat drops that stung my eyes and reduced visibility. As I got closer to the swimmer, I could see the panic on his face. He was exhausted, barely keeping his head above water now. Hold on, I shouted over the wind. I'm almost there, 20 feet away. 15, 10. That's when it happened. A blinding flash, so bright it seared my retinas. A crack like the world splitting open. For a moment, everything went silent and still. Then pain, unimaginable, all-consuming pain that ripped through every nerve in my body. I was dimly aware of flying backward, my board torn away by the force of the impact. I hit the water hard, stunned and disoriented. Every muscle spasmed, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't remember how to swim. But years of training kicked in, and I forced my arms and legs to move, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp. Through the haze of pain and confusion, one thought burned clear: the swimmer. I spun in the water, searching frantically. Where was he? Had the lightning struck him too? Then I saw him, face down in the water, motionless. Ignoring the protests of my battered body, I swam to him, up close. I could see angry red marks branching across his back, the telltale signs of a lightning strike. I rolled him over, relief washing over me when I saw his chest still rising and falling. He was unconscious but alive. Getting us both to shore was a blur of pain, exhaustion, and sheer determination. Every stroke was agony, but I pushed through, knowing that 2 lives depended on my effort. As we neared the beach, I saw figures running into the surf. Jake and the backup team. Strong hands grabbed us, pulling us from the water and onto the sand. The next few minutes were chaos. CPR on the swimmer, oxygen masks, the wail of approaching sirens. Someone was asking me questions, but I couldn't focus. The world swam in and out of focus, darkness creeping at the edges of my vision. The last thing I remember before passing out was the swimmer coughing, his eyes fluttering open. I woke up in the hospital, my body feeling like one giant bruise. The doctor explained that while the lightning hadn't struck us directly, we'd been hit by what's called a side flash. Still incredibly dangerous, but not as immediately lethal as a direct strike. "You're very lucky," she said. "Both of you." It wasn't until later that evening that I got the full story. The swimmer, his name was Mark, had been a former Olympic hopeful. He'd fallen into depression after an injury ended his career and had taken to pushing himself with dangerous open water swims. "I thought I was invincible," he told me when he came to my room, his voice hoarse. I don't know what I thought, but you saved my life. Thank you." I wanted to be angry with him for putting us both in danger, but looking at his haunted expression, I couldn't muster the emotion. Instead, I just nodded. "Just promise me you'll stick to the pool from now on," I said. He managed a weak smile. "Deal." As I recovered over the next few weeks, I had a lot of time to reflect on what happened that day. The fragility of life, the raw power of nature, the fine line between bravery and foolishness. My first day back at the beach was strange. Every dark cloud on the horizon made my heart race. The sound of distant thunder sent a shiver down my spine. But as I climbed up to my familiar perch on the lifeguard tower, I felt something else too, a renewed sense of purpose. I watched the beachgoers splashing in the surf, watched parents helping their kids build sandcastles, watched teenagers showing off for each other in the shallows. And I realized that what I did mattered, that being vigilant, being prepared, being willing to put myself on the line, it all mattered. The scars from the lightning will fade with time, but the memory of that day, the lesson it taught me, will stay with me forever. Nature is beautiful and terrifying, unpredictable and awesome. As lifeguards, as humans, all we can do is respect its power, stay alert, and be ready to act when others are in danger. I turned my gaze back to the water, scanning for any signs of trouble. The sun was shining, the waves were gentle, but I knew how quickly things could change. And I was ready, because sometimes lightning does strike twice. And when it does, someone needs to be there, ready to dive in and make a difference. I've seen people reach enlightenment before, but I've never seen someone become possessed by it. Until that day on the beach, when tranquility turned to terror. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange as our small group gathered on the beach. I'd been leading these sunrise meditation retreats for years, but something about this morning felt different. Maybe it was the unusual stillness of the air, or the way the waves seemed to whisper rather than crash against the shore. There were 12 of us in total, a mix of regulars and a few new faces. As we settled onto our mats in a loose circle, I took a moment to study each person. Most looked eager, if a bit sleepy, but one woman caught my eye. She was new to the group, probably in her mid-30s, with long dark hair and an intensity in her gaze that I couldn't quite place. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice soft but carrying in the early morning quiet. "Let's begin by taking a few deep breaths, centering ourselves in this moment." I guided them through some gentle stretches, helping to wake up their bodies as the world around us slowly came to life. Seagulls called in the distance, and the first beams of sunlight began to warm our skin. "Now, close your eyes," I instructed. "Focus on your breath, in and out. Let the sound of the waves become your anchor, washing away any thoughts or worries." As we sank into the meditation, I kept my eyes open, scanning the group as I always did. It was a habit born from years of experience. While most people found deep relaxation in these sessions, occasionally someone would become overwhelmed or emotional. At first, everything seemed normal. Faces relaxed, breathing slowed. But about 10 minutes in, I noticed something odd. The dark-haired woman, Sarah, I remembered, was sitting unnaturally still. While everyone else swayed slightly with their breath, she was as motionless as a statue. I kept my voice steady as I continued to guide the group, but I found my attention increasingly drawn to Sarah. Her face had gone slack, eyes closed but with rapid movement beneath the lids. A thin sheen of sweat had broken out on her forehead, despite the mild morning air. "If your mind wanders, gently bring your attention back to your breath," I said, moving a bit closer to Sarah as I spoke. "Remember, there's no right or wrong way to meditate. Simply observe your thoughts without judgment." The minutes ticked by, and my unease grew. Sarah hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't even seemed to breathe. The others in the group were still deep in their own meditative states, unaware of the strangeness unfolding beside them. As we neared the end of the session, I decided to bring everyone back a bit earlier than usual. "Slowly begin to deepen your breath," I instructed. "Wiggle your fingers and toes, gently awakening your body." One by one, the group began to stir. Eyes fluttered open, stretches and yawns rippled through the circle. But Sarah remained frozen. "When you're ready, open your eyes and rejoin us here on the beach," I said, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. Everyone else was now fully alert, looking around and smiling at each other. But as they noticed Sarah's unnatural stillness, those smiles faded to looks of concern. I knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, can you hear me? It's time to come back now." No response, not even a flicker of movement. One of my regulars, a retired nurse named Diane, moved closer. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice low. I shook my head slightly. "I'm not sure. She's not responding." Diane leaned in, checking Sarah's pulse at her wrist. "Her heart rate is very slow," she reported, frowning. "And look at her eyes." I gently lifted one of Sarah's eyelids. Her pupil was fully dilated, the eye itself moving rapidly as if in a state of deep REM sleep. "Sarah," I said more firmly, giving her shoulder a gentle shake. "Sarah, I need you to come back to us now." The rest of the group had gathered around, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear. I could hear whispered speculations. Was it a seizure? Some kind of trance? Suddenly, Sarah's body went rigid, her back arched, head tilting back at an unnatural angle. A low moan escaped her lips, unlike any sound I'd ever heard a human make. "Give her some space," I ordered, my heart racing. "Diane, call 911. As Diane fumbled for her phone, Sarah's eyes snapped open, but instead of awareness, they were filled with something else, something ancient and unknowable. Her gaze fixed on a point in the distance, far out over the water. "Sarah," I tried again, fighting to keep my voice calm. "Can you tell me what you're seeing?" Her mouth opened, but the words that came out weren't her own. The voice was deep, resonant, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded almost like Sanskrit, but with a guttural quality that sent chills down my spine. The other members of the group backed away, some making signs of the cross or murmuring prayers under their breath. I stayed where I was, torn between fascination and terror. "The ambulance is on its way," Diane reported, her voice shaky. I nodded, not taking my eyes off Sarah. Her chanting had grown louder, more insistent. Her body began to tremble, fingers clawing at the sand beside her. "What's happening to her?" someone whispered. I wished I had an answer. In all my years of leading meditations, I'd never encountered anything like this. I'd heard stories, of course, tales of people accessing past lives or communicating with spirits during deep meditative states. But I'd always dismissed them as New Age fantasies. Now, faced with the reality before me, I wasn't so sure. Sarah's chanting reached a fevered pitch. Her eyes, still fixed on that distant point, began to fill with tears. But they weren't normal tears. They were thick and dark, leaving inky trails down her cheeks. "Oh my God!" Diane gasped. "Is that blood?" Before I could respond, Sarah's body went limp. The chanting stopped abruptly, leaving a ringing silence broken only by the gentle lapping of waves. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes cleared, focusing on the faces around her with obvious confusion. What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you all staring at me?" Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. "Sarah," I said gently, "how do you feel?" She blinked, seeming to take stock of herself. "I feel amazing, actually, like I've slept for 1,000 years." Her brow furrowed. "But I had the strangest dream. I can't even describe it. It was beautiful and terrifying and..." She trailed off, noticing the dark stains on her cheeks. "What's this? Am I bleeding?" In the distance, I could hear the wail of approaching sirens. "The paramedics are on their way," I told her. "You gave us quite a scare." As we waited for the ambulance, I did my best to calm the rest of the group. Some were shaken, talking about leaving early. Others were full of questions I couldn't answer. Sarah herself seemed dazed but elated, trying to put into words the visions she'd experienced. When the paramedics arrived, they found nothing physically wrong with Sarah. Her vitals were normal, her pupils reactive. The strange tears had already dried, leaving no trace. They recommended she go to the hospital for further tests, but she declined, insisting she felt better than she ever had in her life. As the group dispersed, still buzzing with nervous energy and wild theories, I found myself standing at the water's edge. I stared out at the horizon, at the point where Sarah's gaze had been so intently fixed. The ocean looked as it always had, vast, mysterious, indifferent to our human concerns. But now I wondered, what lay beneath that placid surface? What ancient wisdom or cosmic truths might be accessible to a mind open and still enough to receive them? And at what cost? Sarah approached me, her eyes bright with an inner light I'd never seen before. "Thank you," she said simply. "That was life-changing." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she turned to leave, I called out, "Sarah, will you be back next week?" She looked over her shoulder, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "Oh, yes," she said. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As I watched her walk away, I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Whatever had happened here today, whatever door had been opened, I knew our quiet little beach meditations would never be the same. I took a deep breath, feeling the salt air fill my lungs. The sun was high now, the day in full swing. In a few hours, this stretch of sand would be filled with sunbathers and children building sandcastles, oblivious of the cosmic drama that had unfolded here at dawn. But I would remember, and I would be ready for whatever the next sunrise might bring.